Welcome to Tea and Stories. I actually forgot my teacup today. You believe it? Goodness. But I'm glad that everybody's okay. Glad to see everybody. Oh, you like? Paparazzi special. Paparazzi special. The story that I'm going to tell you today is about the wonders of the kindness of little children. You see, a lot of times as we get older, we can kind of forget that older people need visits and folks to come talk to them and stuff like that. And especially if you're used to somebody being kind of the one that takes care of everybody. Sometimes people forget that they need a little bit of love and taking care of too. This particular story comes from a friend of mine, an older friend, who told me about the little girl that lived up the street from them. John Flatbush had lived by himself for about 10 years. It was 10 years since his beloved wife, Krishna, passed away. 10 years for the last time that he saw his son, who was deployed to Iraq. 10 years since his Dorothy, his beloved daughter, moved with her family to Paris. He was all alone. And Mr. Flatbush, he was used to being a social person, for his wife had always had parties and hung around. And even though he himself was a little shy, he loved his wife's parties, and he loved being around laughter and family. And he never complained about anything. Everything was cool to him. Everything was fine. Well, he was up in his 80s now, and he was starting to feel the pangs of being alone. He's turning into what he would call a crusty old man. The truth was that he was just lonely, but he didn't know what to do about it. And so, it was shocking to him in a way when new neighbors moved up the street. The children that he had known who had grown up on the street had all grown up and left. None of them were still there, and he didn't really know his neighbors very well anymore. But this family was different. It was a woman with 4 children, the oldest of which was a very tall, lanky girl with long plaits and always had a book in her hand. Now, Mr. Flatbush, he would chuckle when he'd see this little girl, because that's the way his daughter, Dorothy, had always been. Always a book. If not a book, a diary and her pen. And he liked that. It felt familiar to him. It made him happy. Now, the other 3 in the family was 2 boys and a little teeny girl. And he always saw the older girl taking care of all of them. And he was proud to see her do that. He didn't think that children did that anymore with all the technology. But they showed signs of the times quite often. He would see them out there with their little pads, their iPads and stuff, reading it. But he also saw them climbing the tree and going in and out of the treehouse that had been built in that backyard. A treehouse, by the way, that he had helped build from the first owner of the house. He would go out in the backyard and pretend like he was doing some gardening out there just so he could look at them, just so that he could hear their laughter. And it made him feel less lonely. Well, one day he was out there, it was kind of early in the morning, and Mr. Flatbush tripped and he fell to the ground. Now, the old man wasn't the way he used to be. Getting up from off the ground was not an easy thing, and he tried and tried. He was crawling over a little bit, and then suddenly he heard a sound. Do you need some help, mister? He turned around, and it was the oldest girl from up the street. Yeah, I guess I could use a little help, sweetheart. Here. And she grabbed a bench and gave it to him so that he could put his hand on it. And then she gave him her shoulder and helped him up. And he sat down on the bench. Are you okay, mister? Oh, yes, I'm fine now. Thank you, sweetheart. I don't think you're fine. That had to hurt. Look, my mommy's a nurse. You want me to go get her? Oh, no, baby. I'm fine. I really am. Just a little sore, maybe. And definitely feeling my dignity kind of took a plunge. That's what my grandpa always said whenever something would happen. Where does your grandfather live? North Carolina. We're a long way from there now. The tiny town was right outside of Philadelphia, and Mr. Flatbush understood how she felt. You know, my people from North Carolina, too. Where? Oh, Winston-Salem. We used to live in Greensboro. I liked it. But Mommy thought it would be better for us to be up here, near her people. See, Daddy, he's overseas now. Oh, your father's in the military? He's in the army. He's in Iraq. He found out that the little girl's name was Meka. Meka was a sweet girl. And that day was her day off. Mommy always gives me the day off when she's at home. Usually I take care of the little ones, but she said I'm getting older and I deserve to have some time to myself. Well, Meka's little brothers were Junior and Richie, and her baby sister's name was Penelope. Oh, he was so happy to know them. Every once in a while, Meka would come up and visit with him and bring the little ones. And Mr. Flatbush just had a wonderful time, letting them run around the yard. Finally, Meka went into the kitchen one day when she was there, and she said, Mr. Flatbush, would you like me to help you clean up a little bit? It's a big house, and I know it's hard. It is getting a little bit hard on me, sweetheart. But if you're going to help me clean, then I'm going to have to pay you a salary. Oh, it's okay, Meka said, and he said, No. Every good worker deserves their pay. You remember that. Okay. And so she started doing odd jobs from around the house. She would clean up the stove and wipe things down and vacuum for him. And she would come over at least every other day. And he would give her $10 a week, but most of the time she would just take it and spend it on her little brothers and sisters. And you know, Mr. Flatbush learned to love that little girl. He was about 80 then. After a few years went by and they were there, one day Meka said, Mr. Flatbush, where is your daughter Dorothy? Oh, she still lives in France. I get letters from her every once in a while. And your son? Oh, still in the military. Probably stationed with your father. Meka chuckled at him. She asked all kinds of questions. Nothing too spicy, but asked questions all the time. And he happily answered her. He showed her photo albums. He talked to Meka about his wife, who he missed very much. Thank you, Meka, he said to her one day. I like being able to talk about my Christiana. I really miss her. You are lonely, aren't you? Oh, not since you've lived on the block, I haven't been. Bless you. You're really sweet. God is going to bless you. He already has, said Meka, and she hugged him. Now, Meka was a thoughtful child. She always thought about other people, and so she decided that she was going to write Mr. Flatbush's children and let them know that he was lonely. And she was also starting to worry about him because he was misplacing things. And she didn't want him to ever fall and something happened to him. Meka's mother agreed. And she said, now don't go bugging Mr. Flatbush today, dearest. I'm not going to bug him. I just want to go see him. He's really lonely, Mommy. And he's not always real steady on his feet. It's getting worse. Now, Meka got the address of his daughter and had written her. So one day, she came to the house and Mr. Flatbush was just sitting in the chair. He looked a little confused and dazed. She said, are you okay, Mr. Flatbush? Oh, Dorothy, will you get Daddy a glass of water? I'm not feeling so good. Meka started to remind him that she wasn't his daughter Dorothy. But she was worried about the way he looked. She went in the kitchen and got him a glass of water, but she called her mother. Mommy, I think there's something wrong with Mr. Flatbush. In a few seconds, her mother was up the street, and it was true. There was something wrong. He was ill. He had a little bit of a fever and wasn't doing as well as he could be. And her mother talked him into going. Meka's mother talked to him gently and softly and talked him into going to the hospital. It was a good thing, too, because he had had a mini stroke. If he had been there by himself, God only knows what would have happened. Everyone talked about how sweet it was, and then his daughter came from Paris, too, and she said, Meka, you're a lifesaver. And she said, but is he going to be okay? Yes, but I don't think that he can stay in that house anymore. It's too much. So they all sat down and talked. Mr. Flatbush did not like the idea of moving out of his house. He loved his house. His daughter assured him that she would stay there and stay in the house, but since her children were a little bit older and they wanted to come back to the States anyway, but she really didn't want him there by himself, and the steps were getting to be too much. And so gently, sweetly, calmly, rationally, they talked to him about moving to a retirement home. But Meka could see the sadness on his face. And she said, you know, Mr. Flatbush, I like it. It's a pretty place to live, and you won't be by yourself anymore, so you won't be lonely. And I'll come and see you. I'll come and see you every Saturday. I promise. Mr. Flatbush kind of smiled, and he's like, thank you, sweetie. I probably wouldn't have been able to stay in my house as long as I had if it hadn't been for you. Bless your sweet little heart. Mr. Flatbush lived maybe another 5 years. And Meka, like she promised, she always went to see him. When he got kind of close to dying, he called his daughter in and he talked to her, and they had made a decision. Mr. Flatbush saw Meka and called her to him. Baby, what did you tell me you wanted to do when you grew up? Oh, Mr. Flatbush, I said that I want to be a writer. I think you'll make a good one. I want to make sure that you get your wish. What do you mean? Well, you'll see. Think of it as a parting present. What do you mean a parting present? I don't think I'm going to be around too much longer, dear. Meka looked really sad and he touched her face and he said, none of that. I'll be with my Christiana. And I'll know that I'll be leaving behind someone beautiful and wonderful to remember me. Remember that story I told you, Meka? You mean about remembrance? Yes. He reached in his pocket and he pulled out a beautiful, beautiful silver watch. And on that watch was carved into it a tree. I want you to ask my daughter, when I'm gone, to tell you the story of the remembrance tree. I'm sure Dorothy will remember. And this is so that you'll know and always be able to remember the remembrance tree. Promise me that you'll try not to be sad. I'm tired, sweetheart, and I'm ready to go. Yes, sir, Meka said, and they hugged each other really tight. And in a few days, Mr. Flatbush was gone. At his memorial service, Meka brought the watch and she said, Miss Dorothy, would you tell me the story of the remembrance tree? Mr. Flatbush gave me this and, oh, how wonderful, Dorothy said. And she sat her down and she said, there is a tribe in Africa that planted a tree every time someone passed. It was called the ancestor tree. But Daddy told the story different. He said that there was once a place where there was a special tree always planted every time someone passed. And it was so that they would always be remembered. It was called the Forest of the Ancestors. And there was once a man who had no children, but all the children of the village came to visit. And when he died, there was no one to plant his tree, and so he would be forgotten. But all the children of the village came together, and they asked the ancestors for permission to plant a tree for him, because he was all of theirs. They belonged to him, and he belonged to them. And at first the village elders didn't want that to happen, but they let the children because they saw how deeply they loved her. They loved him. It was a beautiful story. And it's special that my father gave you this, because it means that he wants you to remember him always. Are you going to keep his house? Meka asked. Yes. My husband and I decided that we're going to stay here. Well, is it okay then if we plant a tree? It'll be his ancestor tree. Dorothy smiled and said, Meka, I think that's perfect. I think we'll do just that. Now, that tree is awfully tall now. And Meka, she's a grown woman. Oh, and what he meant was that he left her a legacy. Money to help her go through college. And Meka did just that. And she's a writer. And Meka also learned from Mr. Flatbush that elders have great stories to tell. And that as long as you say someone's name, they'll always be there with you. Now, you might say, oh, that's such a sad story, but it really isn't. You see, in the Bible it says that better is the day that you die than the day that you're born. The reason why it says that the day that you're born, there's no record spread out before you. But the day that you die, the whole record of your life is there. Good and bad. And you leave such great things behind. Mr. Flatbush, his last years of his life were spent in loving someone who wasn't related to him, but who gave him joy and cared about him. And when Meka goes, she'll do the same. And isn't that the way life should be? Us loving up on each other? Because what is family anyway? But someone who you care and share your life with. It doesn't matter how long or how short. I hope you enjoyed that story. It was nice to think about that today. Also, this was one of those days that was full of old music and records and thinking about my husband and I and our children. I think everybody should have days like that, don't you? I hope everybody enjoyed their tea and stories today. And I hope that if you didn't get a chance to see the whole thing, that you'll watch the replay. And also, if you would please check out my jewelry page. If you see something that you like, please just inbox me. I'll be posting some pictures of some jewelry that's getting ready to come in soon. And I hope to have a live party sometime this week. And I thank you all for joining me. And I love you all very much. Have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon.